I think it's you who deserve an applause, not me, because you've made it through the entire day, so the last 4 years. Uh, been really interesting day, kind of from the last 2 days for me, from the perspective of kind of a technical, this whole deliverability, super technical things, the authentication, and then kind of the other axis for me is the creatives, the campaigns from Puma, Canyon, kind of like the more creative side, the campaign planning, and really interesting stuff. I was gonna look at probably something slightly a little bit different. So uh, I want to focus on customer identity, which is something that not really a lot of people would really pick up, and I didn't really hear that mentioned here. So I think that's why it's interesting, and there's very few of us here, so let's make it interactive. Talk to me if you have comments, please. Already got the introduction. Probably one other thing I want to highlight outside of Mero is She Loves Data, which is our little baby side project, which grew out of proportion. It's a Singapore-based nonprofit where we do look at education for women and other communities at this point as well. That's a little bit blown out of proportion at this point. We've got 300 volunteers in 35 cities in the world. Do offline, online workshops, really interesting stuff. Work with a bunch of vendors, and I don't even know how they got so big. So do check it out and get involved in that. It's a great thing to do for the community. So we are a CDP. You've heard a lot about CDPs. You've also heard a lot the last couple of days about EDPs, CD, XPs, XPs, and CRMs, and we need clearly more categories to invent because we don't fit in all of them, right? I think a couple defining things about Mero: we are specialists. We do one thing and we do just that, so we don't really dabble in other categories. We do also focus on being full stack, and we focus on being in private deployment, so on-prem, private cloud. We go anywhere in the world, so kind of compliance, data control, typically super sexy topics for conferences, but we do that, and we know that the rest of the category probably doesn't really focus on that so much. We also are quite full stack, so meaning we have everything from the infrastructure for data management all the way to identity resolution, which I am still learning that a lot of CDPs don't do directly. Blows my mind. And all the way to marketing automation and activation, of course, as well. What I think our big kind of proposition towards the market is, generally as a CDP, not as a Mero, is I think that customer data doesn't get really centralized. I mean, the problem of companies, as I see it, is not that they don't have a single view of customer, it's that they have too many of them sitting in each one of those systems that they have, really. So, there's not such a thing as a entire consumer journey. Part of your data will live in GA, or Adobe, or the likes of that. Some of it, the transactional bit, will live in CRM usually, and then loyalty platforms, and doesn't really find home very easily. And if it finds home, then it finds home in IT, and the business doesn't get to touch it so easily. So this is really, really tricky. So just to kind of really frame what we focus on and where the problem is. So what we talk about is customer identity, right? And I want to talk about what customer means. Probably means different things to different people. And it's sometimes easy, sometimes super complicated. Obviously, this is hinting but not exclusive to B2B and B2C, because customer definition is completely different in those spaces. And you also see that there are specialized vendors who don't really compete in either of those. So they're typically quite exclusive. So our approach to identity is graph-based. This is really evolution stage for me, because when you look at something like a CRM, traditionally you have to set literally what is called primary ID of the customer, right? Typically would be an email address, phone number, something like that, and we really see this a lot historically. Bad news: customer is not equal to email address. They are typically more things than that, and that's kind of what I want to kind of demonstrate a little bit. The number in Europe, I was just doing this presentation in Jakarta 3 weeks ago in Indonesia. The number there is 2.2, so we're already obviously higher digital maturity here, Western Europe altogether. That's the number of connected devices per person. So if you think your customer equals the email address, then sorry to disappoint, your customer is on average 5 different connected to internet devices that they can interact with your brand usually. So look around yourself, what you brought with you today, your laptop, your iMac at home, your work computer on the desk, your phone, your tablet, and probably your watch and whatever else you have connected. So that's really where the complexity increases. So it's not just the channel and touchpoint complexity for customers, it's also what really represents them, what devices they have available. The number is highest in obviously North America, most digitally developed market in the world as a large market, so there's still kind of such a thing that there's still some growth that we're going to see here, and obviously IoT just opens that up massively as well. This is what every single customer experience and marketing technology vendor sells you or sells to customers, and it's a beautiful dream. I've been able to dig up presentations from IBM from something like 1992 when they are selling single view of customer, and clearly we haven't solved the problem since then, so that's still is something that exists, right? So that's a beautiful dream. You want to have that, obviously, but I want to kind of walk you through a small example of what does that really look like in real life, right? So imagine we are in e-commerce. We sell electronics. So this is what the first visit and first interaction from a brand new visitor looks like, right? We collect a cookie, ideally first party. Ideally, we don't set it just through JavaScript, so it's long and sticky, especially on those funky Safaris and things. We will collect any other advertising pixel with that as well, no problem. They will be useful if you want to retarget, remarket later through custom segmentation, and that's kind of what you get, and you start building the customer profile there. The person comes back again, you get the information in UTMs that they are retargeted on Facebook, which ad they saw, and they come back, and obviously this is still the kind of the awareness discovery phase. We are able to hit them with a sign-up pop-up because we understand that they are brand new, so we do that, and we get identification. By the way, the resemblance with our colleague Dan over there is purely accidental. So you see how the profile starts building up. So now we have Jan's email address, and we have sent him a discount code for the first purchase, classic e-commerce, giving up some incentive 101. And we start sending him that email, right? Because we've got his address now. So we send him the things that he was first looking at. So we have a campaign, doesn't buy, doesn't bite. So we send him a second thing. We try a different category. Maybe it's a monthly promotion or whatever. But you see how those IDs, those message IDs are connected to that email address, and that's obviously a profile that kind of keeps on building and building. What happens is that he eventually gives in salary day or whatever, and he buys what he initially came for. So really, buyer we cannot really influence so much, so he buys the purchase. What also happens is that we automatically enroll him into loyalty program because he made a purchase and he gets into certain level. Gets into his email, and what happens next? What happens next is that his wife gets a handle of that loyalty number, which carries some discounts, and she goes and she buys herself a hair dryer, right? And you see how that purchase will be linked to that ID that is attached to his email address, and that's the customer identity, how this company sees it, right? And what happens next? Upsell, cross-sell, right? Because that's his first purchase. So what do we send Jan? Hair straightener. What do you think? Does Jan have a use case for hair straightener? Don't think so. See? And this is what everybody's doing in marketing, unless you have a good understanding and good configurable identity of a customer. So it's really, really important to be able to address cases like that. So that happens. The moral of the story really is that customer isn't a email address, it's a person with multiple devices, it's a family, it's a household. This is literally how married or not married couple can look like in an online grocery. You're logging into one account, sharing that on 4 different devices, and you have an app and browser because maybe the app is a little bit clunky. So you're 4 different devices, 1 account, and you're ordering groceries, building a list of that together. You could have a family. This is literally me, obviously not that old guy, but my phone plan. I've got 5 people on it. I've got 5 phone plans, 2 internet plans, 2 TV plans. We've got 8 connected devices, and I pay for it. So is there a point for my T-Mobile, my provider, advertising to the rest of my team on there? Probably not, because I buy, right? So you want to kind of work with that, you want to operate with that. Should they be advertising new plans for them? I really don't think so. So the idea of understanding who the customer is really important. Obviously, B2B, completely different animal. You start having structures and layers, and that's a completely different environment. How does this work? Because I want to be very practical, so I want to show you what does this look like in demonstrating the value of this for a business. So this is anonymized. Customer that we did this with doesn't allow us to publish it because they think it's useful, so they don't really want to have their brand name on that. And what happens here is you see that I've got 2 sides. So one is where we identify customer on one device, which is about 75% of their database. That's all captured by the CDP. And the other where we have more than one device. So it's typically 2 phones or 2 browsers or a combination of a laptop and a phone. What you see is that happens is that the lifetime value is 60% higher. There's also higher purchase frequency, and the 25 people make up altogether for about something like 34% of the revenue. So it's kind of like a little bit of the play on the 80-20 rule, right? But that's really valuable. And just to demonstrate that it's not coincidence that because they buy more, we capture them, but because we capture them, we target them more with personalized stuff, they buy more, is that you also see where we stripped out the communications that we have for them because we track every single event, right? So we have a website and email, but only the personalized stuff. So none of the company broad newsletters. It's really just the personalized stuff. And it goes from 8 pieces of content on website to 14, and from 4 email to 6 in 30 days window. So that shows you that there's a lot more personal touch to that person. Also, what does this mean and where that's important? I think this is an important segue to me. Is you have to understand what do you know quantitatively about the customer. So the example with one device, average is 31 events, and I think this is per year, so it's a little bit standardized. And what you see with that is capturing page views, email opens, click-throughs, and purchases, and add to baskets, and everything in that realm that you can imagine. The idea is that where you do have obviously 2 devices, this is higher. So we are capturing more than twice as many events, and we are calculating 70% higher amount of the customer values, and the values are what the attributes that we would use for segmentation for purchase later. But the idea is that in a world where algorithms are becoming commodity, and I understand that every single marketing automation tool will have the built-in fantastic recommender, and that that's useful and easy. But really, you see that with the large language models. A little bit of a segue here. You see that what happens is that that's becoming generally available as a commodity. So what really matters is the data, and that's going to be the differentiation that the companies have when they feed whatever engine that they choose and pick and build or buy or assemble or composably assemble, whatever. The volume of the data, its quality and a structure will really be what makes the difference. So I do believe that this is critical for future-proofing brands. I also want to show you how this works on an example when the identity is deployed. So this is like a double click on different client on specific campaigns. Abandoned basket. Everybody knows that, right? Don't need to explain this. What we do kind of a little bit of a specialty here that we do is that when we pick a product that the customer added to the cart and obviously didn't finish the purchase, we also calculate a similar product specifically from a subset of private label brands that this customer is saying, and there's a rule that they always have to be cheaper, which they typically are, and we slide it into the email to do what? To shift the customer from the original, more expensive branded to the generic or the private label brand because of what? Because of obviously higher margin. So makes perfect sense, and that switch is something that you want to do. Also, try doing this on a templated solution with email tools. Good luck with that. It's not going to be easy. By the way, this email gets sent by MailKit that the guys were also here today and yesterday. So how does that work when we think this is something you probably know. I think what I want to show you also is how does that work when we plug that identity. This is a classic abandoned basket case with a customer where we've literally placed ourselves as a CDP between MailKit, the email tool, and the website. So we are doing the decisioning on CDP with the connected identity. That's really nice stats. So we go 3 times the volume of emails that we are able to send because we are doing triggers from devices where the people did not logged in, didn't leave email, but we are connecting them to the device where they have the email address on. And really corresponding stats on the volume, so the performance, and I'm sorry for the formatting, it's really not for PowerPoint. So there's about 300% increase in volume, same performance, and same revenue increment. So proving that it works. So I think one of the things I like to talk to brands about is not like how many customized and personalized scenarios do you have, but how are they working? Is there some benchmark? Are you really sending as many as you could, and not technically sending through the deliverability optics, but through the are you triggering as many as you can? Because I think really that's an area I would love brands to be digging in a little bit more. Also, what really changes the game completely is then when we add the omnichannel approach to that. Email is fantastic. In Europe, obviously super important, but there are channels that gets to see more views and simply many more eyeballs. So, little example. So we're taking the creative from the abandoned basket from the email and making it a web banner very simply. I didn't have a chance to put it on the slides, but we were looking at some Dutch large e-commerces to see what happens when you add something to the cart, leave the website, come back. What happens is very simple. There's a little number somewhere in that basket icon. It's about 4 pixels high, and that changes. And that's the only notification you get as a returning visitor that there was something you were looking at. So obviously very much not ideal. You can do that way more in someone's face, if that makes sense. So a little kind of a math example on how does that work when you do this on top of your email automation. So 41K is in this case what classifies as the abandoned basket. So someone walked through the site, added something to the cart, did not buy, left. Yeah. So that's 60-day window, really arbitrary, just so we have that example, the benchmark. The last 2 weeks from the day 0, half of those people returns, which is pretty much confirming the global trend that about 50% of people who have that high intention do come back. Obviously, they come back through different means. This could be a combination of remarketing. This could be a combination of email, a bunch of things. So obviously, organic and direct as well. So that's about half of them will come back. What also happens is that out of the 41K, we are able to send almost 10% of those we can readdress with email. Really mature business, really big customer base, super saturated, and sticky customers. So it's a good brand, 10% not bad, right? Has obviously open rate, has some transaction from that. So what happens is you are leaving quite a bit on the table. So we will retarget them with a banner like that. Obviously, mobile, desktop, you can do both. And you are basically saying that for 4,000 sent emails in the same time period, we can do additional 14,000 web reminders that are in more pushy pop-up way that for the people when they come back. And what happens with that is obviously we are filtering out people who would be coming directly to the cart, clicking through emails. That's super easy to filter out. So this is really very, very optimized for the experience. And out of this, what you actually get to see is that email, obviously one of the highest conversion rates on abandoned basket as usually. You would be used to that. So you see about 1,000 transactions from those 4,000 emails sent. That's really good. But what you also see is additional 3,500 transactions from that web visits. And of course, you could argue that this is just gets in people's way and they would come and buy anyway. But obviously, those are things you can A/B test for, and I don't really want to get into that detail. But the idea is that in parallel, in combination, that really works. So if you're doing content for email, your website should be equally interactive. So I'm a really big fan of web personalization like that. So that's one. Also, one last thing I want to kind of mention really is that we get to see different discussions from different stakeholders across businesses and consultants from different clients on where does this happen, right? Because they're saying, well, we've got the data warehouse, so come on, do we need another data platform? How does this work? Do we need to do that? And what we are really seeing with a customer that we sort of like blindfolded here is that we are working with a customer who's got a very traditional data warehouse operation, really good vendor, but on-prem, and it's really set in stone, literally, or set in metal in this case, because they have a set infrastructure that they can't really increase flexibly when they want, right? But what I'm trying to say is that a customer like that, with I think they are seeing something like 250,000 transactions a year at this point or something like that. So this is growing slowly. So their data warehouse obviously does many other things, but it's really the dimensions are around this. So the transactions that come in from retail and from online are somewhere around 2 million. What do we see in the CDP is we see nearly a billion, at 750 million data points. So just the scalability for that optimized infrastructure is some completely different animal. So composable, great idea. Composable CDP as I mean combination data warehouse and something on top of that sounds great. In reality, super expensive, and total cost of ownership is really, really opaque. So this is something that I think really is worth a little bit of an attention. So that's it. That's it, really. So thanks for everyone for listening, and I hope I didn't bore you to death with the last presentation, and let's get a drink, ideally.
Does anybody have any questions at all?
Good.
For the panel?
Yes, of course.
I do actually throw like a girl. Sorry, girls. So I do hope I get to you.
That was very good.
That was really great. But I was hoping you would address, you teed it up, that great thing with the man's wife using the coupon or code that he'd gotten. And I was hoping you'd show, how do you resolve, I mean, obviously by not using his email address as his unique identifier, it helps you there. But how does your platform disconnect, now create sort of her, separate her from him in the database and start building her profile? What does it do at that point to say, this isn't him, so we need to do this?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. The technical setup will really differ client by client. I just want to say as a frame that it's a configuration base, and that's important. I actually have alternative slide that I have hidden, which is taking little snapshot from about 4 other platforms documentation and underlining some limitations that I see. I've been told it's a little bit too aggressive, so not by the organization, but generally before, so I took it off. But there are, the graph approach has a problem that is, becomes a technological bottleneck. I don't want to get into details of that, but performance-wise, if you want to try to keep something real-time, that's a really, really difficult thing to do if you have too many variables and you're comping database up and down for existing identity, right? If you want to do the identity resolution in real time. So I see vendors doing things like, oh, you can have only 4 rules per identifier, and you have a primary and secondary ID type of thing, but the primary has to be there, and the secondary can be anything, and you can't change them. So here the approach is, we have data engineering background, right? And I think it shows in the Perec architecture in a sense that we do keep raw data completely separate, and we don't change them and override them. Mm-hmm. And we do create level 2 or level 3 on top of that when we would do model things like attributes. And I'm not going away from the identity, but it works in the same way. So you're looking at identifiers that can be anything as long as they are unique. We can do probabilistic overlay of that on top of that as well, but there has to be a use case. That use case is usually advertising. And the general notion is that if you have deterministic possibility, or my conclusion is that if you have deterministic possibility, probabilistic is completely redundant in that case. And what you would do in here is you would have different rules for every identifier and different rules for different places and channels where you find these identifiers, so you can limit. So the classical example, I'll probably give you a slightly different example that's usually very good. You can be decorating links in emails, and that's the ID of the message is something that you are syncing back up to the cookies and the email address from the email database when you reconcile both of them, right? So what do you do when I get an email and I send it to my wife and she opens it up and that associates her browser with my customer identity, right? So there are edge cases that you can mitigate by rules. I would say 99.8%. You're never gonna get it completely right, and the remainder obviously isn't worth it. But custom rules on top of what gets stitched and what does not. You obviously typical things we see is clients, internal domains, partners, internal domains will get completely messy, gigantic profiles because they do not behave like a classic customer. But I think you only need certain level of sanitation. If it's 99% plus, it's good enough because rest you can remove by rules when you're activating. So give you like a kind of a waterfall example of that is when we would be sending triggering automation of things like, again, the abandoned basket example, we would filter out customers where there are more than 2 email addresses attached to a profile just because that's potentially a little bit dangerous.
Right.
And the numbers are insignificant already. So there's a solution for that. Like that's very practical. Super abstract. Sorry if that's getting people lost.
Just one quick follow-up. Sorry, but so as part of it, your platform says we don't recognize this device, and we don't and this isn't what we would expected this identity to purchase. Is it? Are those like triggering sort of the rules you're talking about? So it says, so we think this is someone else.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks.